Charlie Chop Chop here at Bill's Automotive again. A few weeks ago I did a video about Bill's vapor car, and some said that the video was noisy and they couldn't understand what he was saying. Sorry about that, but when you're over an engine that's running, you pick up a lot of noise. So what I'm going to do is ask Bill some questions about gasoline and vapor and what it would mean if all the cars run on vapor and no gas at all. Okay, Bill, I'm going to ask you some questions and you tell me what you think about it.
Okay.
Would it hurt a car engine to run on vapor all the time? And what about overheating the cylinders, because the liquid is supposed to help cool them? Is this true or false?
The vapor will not overheat the car because we did some research back on Pogue's carburetor back there in the 20s and 30s. Pogue run the system for 10 years. The engine runs cooler, no carbon deposits, no emissions. But all these filters out here that go on about vapor making the engine run hot is not true, because the engine will run cooler because it's burning 99.9% instead of 17% as liquid gas would be. So the motor will run cooler and last longer.
Okay. Okay, what about on the older cars? You don't have to mess with the timing on older cars or worry about messing anything up on the newer computer cars running this type of system, do you?
No. Timing, one thing we got to take into consideration, that timing is adjusted by the RPM and the firing of the engine. It's nothing to do with the fuel part. That's where people gets mixed up. A lot of times you get a low-grade fuel that won't burn, and a lot of times we got to advance the timing. We'll get a spark knot and things like that. But on vapor, with it burning 100%, it has nothing to do with timing.
Okay. Now here's a question. Remember back in the 1970s when we had unleaded gas, and you know they quit that.
Right.
It would carbon the valves with lead deposits bad. Running vapor with leaded gas, would you still have this problem?
No, because with vapor it burns everything. With the exhaust analyzer hooked in, there's zero emissions on hydrocarbons and carbon monoxide, so it burns everything that goes through it instead of wasting.
Okay, but wouldn't the lead still be in the vapor, and would it hurt the engine any?
It more or less disintegrates, because you can take that same system in the garage, shut the doors, and you can sit in there and breathe that all 24 hours, and don't bother you, because it's using every bit of it. Everything that expands in vapor, it goes ahead and destroys it, uses every bit of it.
Okay. If you bought a new car and ran it on vapor from the very start, how many miles do you think you could get on that motor?
You know, I would say there's no reason why, the way engines are this day and time, you couldn't get 1 million miles on something like that. I wouldn't say definite, but I would say probably you could.
And if you tore the engine down, say like after 400,000, would you see any build-up, carbon, anything?
There wouldn't be no build-up, no carbon at all. It'd be just like a propane engine. It'd be clean just like the day they put it together.
So would the oil changes last longer?
Oil changes last a long time. One thing about it, the air filter would be the main thing on it, but as far as the oil changes, you can get a lot more out of an oil change with that system. Okay.
Now you got some pages about inventors. You want to show us some. And what happens when you have something foolproof that will work, and you try to get it out to the public and let them know that they could be driving something like this that could help the world and the environment? But the big boys will stop you after you try. Is this true?
Yes, that is true, because back in the 80s we were involved in this system, and we were stopped by the big brothers, the higher up, threatened in a lot of ways. But you know, they always cry out energy, energy. They're no more concerned about energy than the man in the moon, because with the system that Ogle had, the one that Pogue had, it never did get nowhere. And why not clear the air, get better mileage on cars, and get a lot of these sicknesses like cancer and everything else out of the air, so people would live longer and you wouldn't have all these deaths and things we do this day.
I believe that. Okay, we're going to come over here and look at some of these pages that you've got. You want to explain it?
Okay, here we go. Back in '79, Ralph Moody was one of them down in Florida that had a 4-cylinder Perkins engine that he increased a lot of mileage on. Then in '78, we had another one called Flex Gas Vaporizer that was built that produced 110 miles per gallon. In '77, there was a VW Diesel Rabbit that tested, got up to 55 miles per gallon. 1977 was Thomas Ogle, 4,600-pound 1970 Ford Galaxy that run 100 miles to a gallon, right here. 1976, they converted the Ford Pinto over, tested up to 80 miles per gallon. In '74, article from Mechanics Illustrated, everybody's familiar with that, had a humidifying type fuel system that produced over 100 miles to a gallon. 1973, the annual Shell Oil Company out of Wood River, Illinois, put together a '59 Opel that set a record of 376.59 miles to the gallon. And they were more on down through here, like right down here with Charles Pogue, the 33 through 36, produced 200 miles per gallon. And like I say, all these people, like down here at the bottom it says, are all these stories true? You bet they are, and they are just a few of the many thousands that we haven't mentioned. There's more reading here on that, but don't be fooled, because all these things you hear that they say are theories and jokes and fraud, they're not. They are true. But the big brothers doesn't want anything out there like this, because you start pulling bucks out of their pockets when you start increasing your fuel mileage.
Exactly. You get anything else in this book?
Well, I'll tell you what, we can run over here. Here's a gentleman right here. He's dead and gone, named Fred Kurtzabarn out of Perryville, Missouri. They used to work for Ford Motor Company and the FBI. Fred Kurtzabarn taken and told us all about the way things were with the big brothers and things like that. He was a great help back in the '80s before we got stopped with our system. And then we can go to another page here about how we shook them up just a little bit. Let's get over on this one here. This is the first letter, came from Chevron right here, and said, we are very interested in your loop charge sonic impact vaporizer. We can certainly promote your product here. Also let you know how much you need, as we have direct investors that they would be interested in our project. Here's the director, the signature on it. I wrote back. The answer came back to the other corporation right here. We just received your letter and can certainly help you with your cash needs. Here's the guy's name and stuff. Here's a special code that went on the envelope that went. After this letter, it went to California. And then about 2 months after that, we were called in by our attorney, stating that if we didn't quit, we wouldn't be around to do any more. So that's your big brother. That's the way that the things work in our life.
Gotcha. Got any more?
Well, let's see what else we can come up with here. Here's one here back there in the early '80s on a 72 model Ford with a system we had built with a small system with the guy's name, mileage on the car, the year of the car, and down in this area here, here's your .9 on COs, and here's your 88 parts on hydros. It was back in January 19th of '82, and it was all through the Sears and Roebuck store in California, because they're real strict on emissions. And the man was told by the mechanic when they inspected the car that if the right person found out, he wouldn't be around here to talk about it. 2 months after that, I tried to locate the man and never could find him anymore. So your guess is as good as mine what happened. Here's another one on a system we'd put out, and this is .2 on hydrocarbons, and we had 400 parts on hydrocarbons at that time. It was tested and by Natural Resources, this Walt Perjury, and he'd done the testing way back at that time on the car. We got article after article here. You just take a flash of that over here. Different things of where me and Dave Williamson had worked with him back at that time. He's another good friend of mine. Here we are again, right here. And that was back in the early '80s. Then over here we put together what they call a tri-fuel system. We showed them how we could make a car run on acetylene gas, making out a carbide. And we done it. That was at a show at Washington Motor, the Ford place in Washington, Missouri. And then we